What if I told you the richest people aren't chasing money, they're chasing freedom? This story begins on the 42nd floor of a glass tower, somewhere above a sleeping city. The night is quiet, except for the soft hum of air conditioning and the low flicker of screens still awake. Ethan leans against the window, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. Down below, the streets glow rivers of gold and red lights moving endlessly. He used to love this view. It once made him feel powerful, unstoppable. Now it just feels empty. He glances at his phone. A message from his accountant flashes briefly. Congrats again, your net worth just crossed 7 figures. He locks the screen. The reflection staring back at him doesn't smile. Somewhere, deep inside, a voice whispers, "You got everything you wanted." So why does it feel like you lost something? Ethan wasn't born rich. He grew up in a small house with thin walls and a father who came home smelling of sweat and exhaustion. His earliest memory of money was watching his parents argue about it not having enough, spending too much, saving too little. Back then, he made himself a promise. One day, I'll never have to worry about money again. And for years, that promise became his religion. He studied hard, worked harder, and by 28, he was already known in the startup world, a sharp mind with ruthless drive. His company raised millions. Investors called him a financial prodigy. Friends called him lucky. He called himself free. But freedom, as he would later learn, has different shapes. One night, years ago, when he was still building his first company, Ethan overheard something that didn't make sense to him then. It was at a networking event. Dim lights, champagne glasses, laughter that sounded too loud to be real. An older man, quiet in the corner, said to a group of young entrepreneurs, "Rich people see money as a tool, not a goal." Ethan had laughed under his breath. To him, that sounded like the kind of thing people say when they've already made their fortune philosophy dressed as humility. But tonight, standing in his silent apartment, those words echo again, louder than the hum of the city. He turns off the lights. The skyline remains 1,000 tiny suns shining just for him. And yet, for the first time, he feels the weight of it, the emptiness that hides beneath luxury. He walks past the living room, past the designer furniture, the perfectly arranged art. The shelves lined with awards. Every object here tells a story of victory, but none of them tell a story of peace. He opens his laptop, more out of habit than need. The numbers glare back at him. Stocks, assets, investments, graphs climbing endlessly upward. He used to find comfort in these figures, proof that he was winning. Now they look like chains. He closes the screen. When Ethan was younger, he thought money could buy time, that if he earned enough, he'd finally rest. But somewhere along the way, he'd sold his time for money. Every deal, every project, every late night they added more to his account, but less to his life. He remembers his last vacation 3 years ago. Even on the beach, he couldn't stop checking his phone. His girlfriend had laughed at first, then cried later that night when he answered a work call during dinner. She left a few months after. "Don't you get it?" she'd said. "You're building a future you'll be too tired to live in." He didn't understand then. He was too busy building. Now in the silence of this expensive cage, her words return soft but merciless. Outside, the first light of dawn begins to touch the edge of the skyline. The city is waking up again, chasing its next dream, its next deal, its next dollar. Ethan watches the horizon and feels something shift a thought, fragile but persistent. What if I've been chasing the wrong thing all along? He sits down, opens a notebook, something he hasn't done in years. The pages are blank, waiting. He writes a single line. What is money for? He stares at it. The question feels too simple, almost childish. But the longer he looks, the deeper it cuts. He remembers his father's tired hands. He remembers the nights he skipped sleep for work. He remembers how he used to equate wealth with worth. Maybe that was the mistake. As the sun rises, light fills the room, painting everything gold, the same gold that once symbolized success, now soft and human. Ethan whispers to himself, almost like a confession. Money was supposed to give me freedom, not take it away. He sits there for a long while, watching the light shift, the city moving below. And though he doesn't know it yet, this quiet moment of doubt will be the real beginning of his wealth, because every transformation starts with a question. And his was simple. If money isn't the goal, then what is? This is it, Ethan whispered to himself, standing in the middle of his first office, a small space in an old building that smelled of dust and ambition. A single neon sign flickered by the window. His startup's logo, hand-painted, looked uneven, but to him, it was beautiful. He was 24, broke, determined. Every morning he'd wake up before sunrise, down a cup of instant coffee, and stare at his vision board covered in quotes, market charts, and one bold line at the top. Make it big or die trying. It wasn't just about money. It was about proving something. To the world, to his parents, to himself. At first the grind was thrilling chaos disguised as progress. Emails, pitches, investors, late night coding marathons, cheap noodles eaten over spreadsheets. He and his co-founder lived on caffeine and adrenaline. When their first round of funding hit, they celebrated with champagne in paper cups. The next morning, Ethan bought a new laptop and sent his mum a photo with the caption, "We made it." He believed it. Money was finally flowing, small amounts at first, then more, then a lot more. Every notification from his bank felt like a heartbeat. Every deal, a dose of validation. He told himself it wasn't greed, it was momentum. He was building his dream. But what he didn't realize was that dreams built entirely on motion eventually burn themselves out. As success came, so did pressure. The company grew fast, too fast. Suddenly Ethan wasn't the scrappy founder anymore. He was the CEO of something promising. There were board meetings, brand partnerships, employees who looked at him like he knew everything. He didn't. He just knew how to keep moving. He learned to speak the language of investors, valuation, equity, exit strategies, words that sounded powerful but often hollow. Each new milestone felt like a sugar rush, quick, addictive, gone too soon. He'd check social media at midnight, scrolling through other founders announcing bigger rounds, faster growth, shinier offices. His own success started to feel small, so he pushed harder. He hired more people, launched more products, raised more money, always chasing the next win. One night, his mentor, an older entrepreneur named Victor, called him after seeing yet another news article praising Ethan's company. "Congrats, kid," Victor said, voice warm but cautious. "You're doing great. Just remember, fast money burns fast." Ethan laughed. "You sound like my dad." Victor chuckled softly. "Good. Then maybe you'll listen." But he didn't. At 27, Ethan was on magazine covers, speaking at tech conferences, giving interviews about disruption and financial independence. He talked about freedom like he owned it. What the audience didn't see were the sleepless nights, the panic attacks, the empty fridge, the friends he stopped answering. He built a fortress of success and locked himself inside. Then came the crash. It started quietly. Like all crashes, do a deal delayed. A client lost, a few red numbers on a spreadsheet. Then all at once the floor gave way. A market shift, a funding round withdrawn. Within weeks, everything he'd built began to crumble. The same investors who had called him visionary now stopped returning calls. His team panicked, his inbox filled with cancellations and apologies. He stayed in the office for 72 hours straight, trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. At dawn, surrounded by cold coffee cups and crumpled papers, he realized he was broke again. The following days blurred together. He sold his car, laid off his team, and avoided looking at his reflection. One morning, he walked past the office window, the same window that once glowed with ambition, and saw his own faded logo peeling off the glass. He felt something twist inside. He had everything once: money, attention, power, and it still wasn't enough. Now, with nothing left, he felt strangely lighter. But then came the shame, the silence, the fear of starting over. Ethan moved back to a small apartment on the edge of the city, the kind he once promised he'd never return to. He stopped checking his phone, stopped pretending. For the first time in years, he slept deeply, dreamlessly, and when he woke up, he realized something simple, almost cruel. He had spent years chasing numbers that could vanish overnight, while ignoring the things that couldn't be bought at all. A few weeks later, he met Victor for coffee. The old man looked at him, really looked at him the way people do when they've seen that expression before. "So," Victor said quietly, "you finally learned what it costs to chase money for the sake of it?" Ethan managed to smile. "Guess I had to pay the full price," Victor nodded. "We all do, eventually." He leaned forward. "You see, money's like fire. It can cook your food, or it can burn your house down. Depends on how you use it." Ethan sat there in silence. Those words landed differently now, not as advice, but as truth carved from experience. That night, back in his small apartment, Ethan looked around bare walls, second-hand furniture, a single lamp. No awards, no skyline, no noise. He opened his laptop, not to check stocks or trends, but to write again. This time, not a business plan, just a reflection. He typed slowly, deliberately. "I thought money was freedom, but maybe freedom is what happens when you stop needing to prove your worth." He stared at the sentence. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was chasing anything. He was just here. The rain came softly that morning, slow, deliberate, like it was trying not to wake the city. Ethan sat by the window of his small apartment, watching drops trace crooked lines down the glass. It was the first real pause he'd had in years, and it scared him. For the first time since he was a teenager, there was no meeting to attend, no investor to impress, no next thing to chase. Just silence. He tried filling it at first: podcasts, books, gym sessions, anything to keep from hearing his own thoughts. But silence has a way of waiting for you. At night, when the distractions faded, it returned heavy, unrelenting. There's a particular kind of grief that comes when you lose something you built with your own hands. It's not just about the money, it's about identity. Ethan had spent a decade introducing himself as the founder, the CEO, the guy who made it. Now, he wasn't sure who he was anymore. When friends texted, he lied. Yeah, taking a break, thinking about new projects. But most of them stopped asking. The silence in his phone matched the silence in his head. One afternoon, desperate to escape his own thoughts, Ethan went for a walk. He wandered without direction, past the cafes he used to work from, past the office that now belonged to someone else. He ended up in a quiet park, mostly empty, except for a few old men playing chess under a gazebo. He sat on a bench nearby, staring at the board, black and white pieces moving with purpose. One of the men looked up. "Want to play?" he asked, smiling. Ethan shrugged. "I don't know how." The man laughed. "Then today's a good day to learn." He introduced himself as Henry Grey Hair. Kind eyes, the kind of calm that only comes from living long enough to stop pretending. They played for an hour. Ethan lost every game, but Henry didn't seem to care. When they finished, Henry leaned back and said, "You play too fast." Ethan smiled weakly. "Story of my life." Henry chuckled. "Speed isn't the problem. It's playing without a plan." The words landed harder than they should have. For a moment, Ethan forgot about the chessboard. Henry studied him, then asked, "You used to run something big, didn't you?" Ethan hesitated. "Yeah, used to." Henry nodded, not surprised. "And now it's gone?" "Everything," Ethan admitted. "Money, company, reputation, all of it." Henry was quiet for a while. Then he said something Ethan never forgot. "Money amplifies who you are, but it never tells you who you are." Ethan looked at him, unsure how to respond. Henry continued, "When I was young, I built 3 businesses, made a fortune, lost it twice. The third one made me rich again, but by then, I didn't need it." "Didn't need it?" Ethan asked. "How's that possible?" Henry smiled. "Because by then I understood what it was for." He pointed to the chessboard. "Same as this. Money is just a piece on the board, a tool. But most people spend their whole lives treating it like the game itself." Ethan walked home that evening with Henry's words echoing in his mind. For the first time, he didn't feel angry or ashamed, just quiet. He realized how much of his life had been built on reaction, not intention. Every choice he made, every risk, every long night was driven by a need to prove something invisible. But now, stripped of everything, he could finally see what had always been there. Fear. The fear of being ordinary. The fear of not being enough. The fear that if he stopped running, everything would fall apart. And maybe it had. Days turned into weeks. Ethan started visiting the park regularly. Sometimes Henry was there, sometimes not. When he was, they played chess. When he wasn't, Ethan just sat and watched others play. The city felt different now, slower, almost human again. He noticed details he used to overlook. The way sunlight caught on leaves, the rhythm of footsteps, the laughter of strangers. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was the beginning of stillness. One rainy afternoon, Ethan found a small notebook in a second-hand bookstore. Its cover was worn, its pages slightly yellowed. He bought it and began writing again. Not plans, not goals, just thoughts. On the first page he wrote, "If money is a tool, what am I building with it?" He didn't have an answer yet, but for the first time he was asking the right question. A month later, he got a message from an old colleague offering him a job, good pay, steady position. He almost said yes, but then he remembered the quiet peace of that park bench, the weightless freedom of not having to pretend. He realized something subtle but powerful. He didn't miss money, he missed meaning, and maybe that's where the rebuild should begin. That night, he wrote one last line before closing his notebook. "I don't want to get rich again. I want to get free." He smiled for the first time in a long time, a real, small, human smile. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled new, and for the first time so did he. It started with small things. Not grand plans, not business models, just habits. Ethan began waking up early again, but this time without an alarm. He made coffee slowly, deliberately, like a ceremony. He walked to the park, sometimes with his notebook, sometimes with nothing at all. There was no rush, no performance, no scoreboard. He'd sit under a tree, watching the sunlight spill through the leaves, and think about what Henry had said. Money is just a piece on the board. It's not the game. The words replayed in his mind until they stopped sounding philosophical and started feeling practical. Maybe, he thought, the problem wasn't money itself, it was the way he'd treated it. He chased it like a finish line, instead of using it like a compass. He started reading not startup blogs or investment hype, but the old classics, The Millionaire Next Door, Your Money or Your Life, even essays by philosophers who barely mentioned finance at all. He learned something radical, that wealth isn't measured by how much you earn, but by how little you need. He wrote that line on a sticky note and put it on his wall. Wealth, what you can live without worrying. The concept of financial freedom began to take on new meaning. It wasn't about millions, it was about choice. Choice to spend time with people you love. Choice to say no to things that drain you. Choice to wake up in peace instead of panic. One afternoon, Henry joined him again in the park. "You've been quiet lately," Henry said, moving his pawn forward. "I'm thinking," Ethan replied. "Dangerous habit," Henry smiled. "What about?" Ethan hesitated. "About starting again, but differently this time." Henry nodded, encouraging. "I used to think the goal was to make money," Ethan continued. "Now I think the goal is to make money work for me." Henry grinned. "Ah, the difference between being rich and being free." They played in silence for a while. Then Henry said, "So what's your new plan?" Ethan smiled faintly. "To build something that doesn't depend on how much I can earn, but on how much value I can create." Henry raised his eyebrows. "Now you're talking like a craftsman, not a salesman." That night, Ethan opened a new document on his laptop. Not a business proposal, but a simple spreadsheet titled Freedom Map. He listed everything he spent money on: rent, food, subscriptions, transport, and next to each line he asked, "Does this add meaning?" Most didn't. He cancelled half of them that night. It wasn't about cutting costs, it was about cutting noise. He felt lighter instantly. He set small goals: save 6 months of living expenses, build a second income stream, invest only in things he understood. No rush, no pressure, just direction. Slowly, his world changed shape. He started freelancing again, not because he needed money, but because he enjoyed solving problems. He took on fewer clients, charged fairly, and left evenings free to think, read, and walk. He noticed how his relationship with money began to soften. It stopped being a master and became a partner. He realized that money didn't bring happiness, but it protected it. It bought time, security, options, the raw materials of peace. And when used wisely, it could multiply more than wealth, it could multiply meaning. Months passed. Ethan began teaching part-time at a local business school. He didn't lecture about profit or growth, he talked about mindset. One day a student asked, "What's the best way to get rich?" Ethan paused, smiled and said, "Stop trying to." The class laughed, but he continued, "Seriously, the best way to get rich is to learn how to use money, not chase it. Understand it, respect it, and give it purpose. Otherwise, it'll use you." A few students wrote it down. One just stared, thoughtful. Ethan recognized that look he'd worn it once. That evening, after class, he walked home as the sun dipped low. The city looked softer than it used to, less like a battlefield, more like a living thing. He passed a young couple arguing about bills, an old man selling fruit, a street musician playing for spare change. Everyone chasing, everyone surviving. But he saw something else now, the thread that connected them all, wanting enough. And maybe, he thought, enough was where freedom lived. At home, he lit a candle, poured tea, and opened his notebook again. He wrote slowly, thoughtfully. "I used to want to make money work harder. Now I want it to work smarter. To serve, not to rule." He paused, then added, "Money is not the goal. It's the language that helps us build our real goals: time, love, peace, purpose. He closed the notebook, feeling a quiet warmth in his chest. Not excitement, but contentment, the kind that stays. Later that week, Henry called him again. "So," the old man said, "how's the rebuild going?" Ethan smiled. "Slow, but solid." Henry chuckled. "Good. Solid lasts longer than fast." There was a pause, then Ethan said softly, "You were right. It's not about getting rich, it's about getting clear." Henry replied, "Clarity is wealth, son. The kind no market crash can take away." That night, Ethan slept deeply, not because he'd earned enough, but because he'd finally learned what enough meant. And for the first time in years, he woke up not to chase the day, but to live it. 3 years passed. Ethan no longer lived in the city. He'd moved to a small house by the sea, quiet streets, slow mornings, and sunsets that painted everything gold. The house wasn't big. It didn't need to be. It had space for a desk, a bookshelf, and a porch where he could watch the waves crash endlessly against the shore. Every morning he brewed coffee and read a few pages of something old: philosophy, psychology, poetry. Then he'd open his laptop, check his investments, and close it again within 10 minutes. Money had become background music, still there, still useful, but no longer the song itself. He'd built a simple, balanced life. A handful of clients for consulting work. A few stable investments that grew quietly. Like trees, he no longer needed to water daily. Most days he worked for a few hours, then spent the rest teaching, writing, or walking the beach. He didn't chase opportunities anymore. He attracted them. When people asked about his success story, he smiled. "This isn't success," he'd say, "it's peace." One afternoon, Ethan was invited to speak at a youth conference. The topic: financial freedom in the modern world. He stood on stage facing a crowd of hundreds of young faces bright with ambition. He remembered when he looked exactly like them. He began softly. "I used to think financial freedom meant never worrying about money again. But I was wrong. It's not about not worrying, it's about understanding." He told them about his early years, the rise and fall, the illusions of wealth. He didn't dramatize or exaggerate. He just spoke honestly, like someone describing an old dream he'd finally woken from. Then he paused and said, "When I was chasing money, I was broke in every other way: time, health, relationships, peace. Freedom isn't having more money, it's needing less of it." The room went quiet. He could feel the shift, the kind that happens when people stop listening with their ears and start listening with their hearts. After the talk, a young woman approached him. She looked nervous, clutching her notebook. "Sir," she said softly, "how do you know when you have enough?" Ethan smiled, remembering how desperately he once searched for that answer. "You'll know," he said, "when the number stops changing the way you feel." She frowned slightly, confused. He continued, "When you realize that more doesn't add, it only distracts." Her eyes widened a little, and she nodded. That look, that quiet spark of understanding was worth more than any paycheck he'd ever earned. Weeks later, Ethan started volunteering at a local community centre. He taught financial literacy to teenagers. Not the mechanics of money, but the psychology of it. He showed them how to budget, yes, but also how to think, how to ask, "What is this for?" before spending, investing, or chasing anything. He'd start every session the same way. Money is a mirror. It shows you who you are, not who you want to be. At first they'd laugh, then they'd listen. He told them stories about greed, about fear, about peace. He spoke of how money could build freedom or destroy it, depending on the hands that held it. Over time, The lessons grew into something bigger. The teenagers began teaching others. The community built a small program around it, the Freedom Project. And one day, Ethan watched as a group of students presented their first workshop, confident, calm, and wise beyond their years. It moved him more than any business success ever had. He spent the next few months writing a book. It wasn't a financial guide, it was a story, his story. Each chapter began with a question. What if money was never the point? He didn't write to sell, he wrote to share. To pass on what had taken him years to understand that wealth was never about accumulation, but alignment. One evening, he sat on his porch as the sun melted into the horizon. The ocean shimmered endless, alive. He closed his eyes and let the sound of waves fill the spaces where noise used to live. He thought about his younger self, the boy who promised to never worry about money again, the man who mistook wealth for worth. He smiled gently at the memory. He'd forgiven him long ago. He understood now. The boy wanted safety, the man wanted status, but the soul only ever wanted peace. His phone buzzed a message from Henry. "Still playing your own game, kid?" Ethan chuckled and typed back, "Yeah, learn to slow down. Finally winning." A moment later, Henry replied, "That's the secret. The real game isn't about who wins, it's about who stops needing to." Ethan stared at the message for a long time, then turned his phone off. The horizon was glowing red now, fire fading into gold. He took a slow breath and whispered to himself, This is wealth. Not the kind you count, the kind you feel." The city looked different now. It had been years since Ethan last stood in front of the glass tower where everything began. The skyline still shimmered. The streets still pulsed with the same restless energy, but he no longer felt part of the chase. He walked slowly, hands in his pockets, the air colder than he remembered. Above him, the same windows that once reflected his ambition now looked like distant constellations, beautiful, unreachable, and faintly sad. He thought of that night long ago, the whiskey glass untouched, the glowing phone screen announcing his first million. He could still feel the silence of that moment, the heavy, golden emptiness. Back then he didn't understand it. Now he did. It wasn't loneliness, it was truth trying to get his attention. He entered the lobby, greeted the receptionist, and took the elevator up the same 42nd floor. When the doors opened, the space felt smaller somehow. The new tenants had changed the furniture, painted the walls, but the view was the same. He stepped closer to the window. The city stretched out below him, endless and alive. He pressed his palm to the glass and smiled. The boy who stood here once wanted to conquer the world. The man who returned only wanted to understand it. He sat down on the edge of the room, the same spot where he'd once collapsed, exhausted and victorious, not realizing both were the same thing. He closed his eyes and listened. The hum of the air conditioner, the distant rhythm of traffic, the faint whisper of his own breath, and in that stillness, a memory unfolded of a voice calm and wise. Money amplifies who you are, but it never tells you who you are. Henry's words echoed softly, not as a lesson now, but as truth absorbed into his bones. He opened his notebook, the same one he'd carried since the fall, its pages filled with reflections, notes, fragments of thought. On the first page, still visible through faded ink, were the words he'd written years ago. "What is money for?" He smiled. Then beneath it he added a final line. "To build peace." He closed the notebook gently, like sealing a letter to his past self. That evening, Ethan met Henry one last time. They sat together at their usual park bench, the chessboard between them. Henry moved his knight and said, "You know, I always wondered if you'd come back here." Ethan chuckled. "You were right, as always," Henry smirked. "About what?" "That money isn't the goal, it's just a tool," Henry nodded, eyes glinting with quiet satisfaction. "And what's the goal then?" Ethan looked out across the park, children laughing, the golden light of dusk touching the trees. "To live fully," he said softly. "To have enough and know it." Henry smiled. "Then you've already won?" They finished the game without speaking again. When Ethan left, the board was still mid-play, a quiet symbol that life's real game never truly ends. Back at the seaside house, Ethan lit a candle and stood on his porch. The waves rolled in slow and steady, moonlight breaking across their crests. He could hear the sea breathing, ancient, unhurried. He thought of every stage of his life, the hunger, the climb, the fall, the stillness, the peace. Each one had been necessary. Each one had taught him something money never could. He realized, finally, that wealth had nothing to do with possession. It was a feeling of alignment, of clarity, of quiet gratitude for simply being here. He whispered into the night, half to himself, half to the ocean. Wealth isn't about having everything. It's about needing less. The words drifted away on the wind, carried toward the horizon like a prayer. Later, as he sat down to write again, he began the final chapter of his book. Not a guide, not advice, just a story about a man who spent half his life chasing gold, and the other half learning it was never the treasure. He ended it with a single line. The moment you stop seeing money as the goal is the moment you start living freely. He leaned back, exhaled, and smiled the kind of smile that comes from knowing something deeply, not just believing it. Outside, dawn began to rise again. Light spilled across the ocean, shimmering like liquid glass. Ethan stood at the window, watching the horizon bloom with colour. It reminded him of that first scene years ago, another sunrise over another city. Back then, he'd watched it as a man trapped in his own success. Now he watched it as a man free within his simplicity. He took a slow breath and said quietly, "Full circle." And as the world awakened around him, Ethan felt what he had spent a lifetime searching for, not victory, not wealth, but peace. A peace that needed no proof, no number, no applause, just the soft truth that finally, after all the noise and striving, he had enough.